Okay. So, Simchas Torah, which is what we'll be beginning on Saturday night. This is Shmini Atzeret, and Simchas Torah is tomorrow. Is the first, we read the first chapter in Bereshit. It's the act of creation. And according to that chapter, we read, Vayomer Elokim Naaseh Adam B'Tzalmenu Kidmosenu. We say, the Torah says, let us make humankind in our image. Right. This is a strange way for the Torah to begin. Let us make humankind in our image. So what exactly does that mean? It means that God was consulting someone's, some people, some things. And according to the Talmud, God was consulting the angels. You should sit back and relax because it's this is I'm going to teach for a little while on this subject. Just maybe give me like 20 minutes. So the rabbis teach that if God was consulting sort of a ministering body, then how much more so should we consult a body of citizenship? And that's the whole idea of voting, that the leaders consult the masses and the masses direct the leadership. And ultimately, in our democracy, we elect our leaders. We elect them. So it's not just that we guide them, we elect them. And so this is affirmed by the first chapter of our Torah. And I want to tell you, just to follow up on what we've been discussing over the high holidays, that the power of inclusivity is mamish in your vote. It's not how you vote. It's not even the candidate that you choose. Some of you might think it is, but it's not. Just to be crystal clear, it doesn't matter which candidate you're voting for or which party you represent. But the act of voting itself promotes bipartisanship and what I hope will be eventually one day polypartisanship, which ultimately leads to inclusivity. And tonight I hope to illustrate why. But my nose is itching, so I have to use a little tissue to itch my nose. Hold on one second. Okay, so in August, this last August, we observed the 100-year anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And as you know, it's the amendment that helped American women, it's enfranchised the American women to declare the first time that they were, like men, deserving of all rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Not that they're like men, but like men, they deserve all the rights and responsibilities of being a citizen in America. And it took those activists and reformers nearly 100 years to win that right. And I think that we owe it to them to talk about why it's important that you vote. And this is not a public service message, although it is a little bit, but it's Mamish Torah, so stay with me. As I mentioned before, earlier in the service, I used to believe that the word vote was derived from the Latin term meaning voice, but it isn't. It's actually from the Latin term meaning devotion or dedication. It's the word votum. And the Hebrew word, as we said before, is lehatzpia, from the word etzba, or finger, right? I lift my finger to vote in an act of service and devotion. What does that mean? This is how we, as Jews, were counted. Have you heard the term, I won't lift a finger to help? Well, when you lift a finger, you're actually indicating that you're going to help, that you're going to serve, that you're going to devote yourself. You're going to invest. And you do so by lifting your finger. Oh, sorry. My neck is stiff. My nose itches. I'm a human being. What can I tell you? So you may see this done at an auction, when someone lifts their finger to be counted or to invest. So the priests, the Kohanim, also used to invest. They indicated their excitement to serve by lifting their finger. Let me explain how this was performed. A mishmar. Mishmar is a clan made up of priestly families. And there were actually 24 mishmarot. There were 24 clans altogether that served in the Holy Temple. And each mishmar served for 1 week at a time. And they usually served from Shabbos afternoon to Shabbos afternoon. And each group of priests, each mishmar, would serve twice a year, except on the holidays, because that's when they would all come in mass because there were so many pilgrims to Jerusalem. Literally millions of korbanot offerings had to be processed. And why I tell you this? It's because the lieutenant, the head, the chief priest, he was called the Memuna. He would count the fingers of those wanting to offer what was called Trumat Hadeshen, a particular service. And you have to imagine that hundreds of these priests would gather together in a circle, and he would count them, right, according to their finger. They would all put their finger into the center. Now, what was interesting, right, when you learn the Mishnah about this, you'll see that a Kohen could put 2 or 3, maybe 2 fingers if he had to. So why would someone have to put 2 rather than 1? Why couldn't they just bend their finger enough to point 1 finger? And this speaks to what we're talking about tonight. So stay with me, because this is the kicker. When you know what it means to want to be in service and to have, a devotion, you also have to understand the priests and the Kohanim and their indomitable devotion. You see, they served in every season and every weather. They served barefoot and wearing only a pair of linen pants and a linen shirt. And the temple at dawn, the courtyard at dawn, midwinter in Jerusalem, it could be brutal. But it gets quite cold. And so if they weren't shivering with cold, some of them had to have difficulty flexing their fingers, right? That's how it is when you serve and you're devoted, and you can't even flex your fingers, but you hold out as many fingers as you can. That's why the modern term for Hebrew is lahatzpia. That means you have to make sure that you get the absentee ballot by then. You return it by mail. It has to be received by then, by the where does it go? To the voting registry, right? That's where we take it. Board of Elections. It has to be received by November 3rd, obviously. And if you're going to go in person, by November 3rd. But early voting is any time between October 19th and November 2nd, depending on where you live. And I have to tell you, I'm finding some challenges with the voting process. We'd ordered another absentee ballot, and it didn't come because the first one we had issues with. My father still hasn't received his absentee ballot. All of my friends are taking, and my wife is taking our absentee ballots right to the what is it called again? The Office of Elections. Office of Elections, I hope. So what I found was interesting is that here you have the priests that were shivering and fighting the elements, and still they wanted their vote to count. So we really have to be very committed to have our vote count. And speaking of absentee ballots, I want you to know how the absentee ballot came to be. During the Civil War, many of the Union soldiers in the North wanted the war to end. They just wanted to stop fighting. They were tired of the blood and the death. And Abraham Lincoln at the time was terribly unpopular, especially with the soldiers. He was referred to as the widowmaker because so many young husbands and fathers and brothers were dying. And yet, when the absentee ballot idea was brought up, so the soldiers could fight, it was the first time they had the absentee ballot, or they wanted to use it so that the soldiers who were fighting could vote in the general election. Even though it meant that Lincoln was going to lose the election, right? He still approved the absentee ballot, even though it would only benefit those people who didn't want to vote for him. He approved it enthusiastically. His inclusive nature and his devotion to democracy was more important than his victory, and ultimately Lincoln won. Lincoln, with all his integrity and his foresight, understood that nothing is more important than your democratic right to vote, even if you weren't going to vote for him. Now, in Deuteronomy 29, if you're following, it's chapter 29, 9 and 10, it says, Atem netzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokechem. It says, stand before God, all of you. It says your tribal heads, right? It says Roshechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem, Bishotrechem. Your elders, your officials, all of the leaders, all of the elite of Israel should come and stand before God, stand to be counted, stand to vote, right, if you would. And then the next line, it says, and Tapchem, Shechem, Gercha, Asher Bekerev Machanecha, your children, your spouses, even the immigrant in your camp, everyone, from the wood chopper to the water drawer, everyone was being addressed. And look what happened. They were split up into two sentences, right? As if to split up the populace into the leadership and the elite, and then the common citizens and the blue-collar workers. And when the leadership from both parties, right, from all constituents and all factions and all demographics, when they all come together, they form a great presence. Everyone is heard. We call this now bipartisanship or polypartisanship. Moshe says, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem, all standing present together and ready to make a difference. Now there's another image of bipartisanship also in Deuteronomy chapter 27. It says, Eliyamdu, they shall stand upon Har Gerizim, the mountain of Gerizim. The certain tribes will stand on one mountain, right? And they said, I think it was Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, and Yosef, and Benjamin. And then on the other mountain, Har Eval, the other tribes, the other six, Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, and Naphtali. And so you have to get this image of these tribes were split up, right? So you have the entire people sort of split up on both sides of the aisle, if you would, like Congress. And in the middle was the Levim, right? And it says, Va'anu ha-Levim. It says that the Levim, Anu doesn't mean answer here. It usually means answer. It means that they raised their voice and they spoke loudly, right? And it happened in the middle. So there was no talking on either side of the aisle, but the talking and the all of that noise, that holy noise, that political discourse, it all happened in the middle. And you should know that when the Levim spoke, they spoke in legislative terms, things that became our laws. And the Levim are symbolic of divinity. So get this, right? That as we are split on both sides of the aisle, that where the most divine discourse happens is when people come off the mountain into the center. When people leave their partisanship and move to the center to speak. That is divine. And it speaks to this in our Torah, right? It speaks to this in our Torah, that in the middle, you reach a mutual understanding, you create better policy, and you get to know each other. And friends, bipartisanship leads to better laws, because they don't just favor one demographic, but they include everyone. Everyone is included in legislative consideration. So take, for example, the recent Prison Reform Act that was put together in our administration now. The Prison Reform Act was a bipartisan effort, and it's designed to improve conditions for federal prisons by curbing inhumane practices, like they prohibit the use of restraints on pregnant women now, and they encourage placing people in prisons that are closer to their families. And it reorients prisons to rehabilitation rather than punishment. So it's restorative rather than punitive. And this is the movement that we hope to be moving towards in our prison system. And I got to tell you, we've got a lot to learn about how to, there's a lot of systemic oppression in the prison system now, and this is the beginning of new laws that I hope address that sort of oppression. And it also shortens prison sentences. So all of the Democrat friends of mine, you should note that this was done under our current administration. And when people come together from both sides, regardless whether you agree with the administration or not, when we begin to talk to each other about our ideas and our feelings, these kinds of laws, this kind of legislation moves through. And when you vote in the general election, in the primaries too, next time around, but when you vote, you encourage this kind of bipartisan work. The more people who exercise their right to vote, it doesn't matter how you vote, it doesn't matter who you vote for, but if you exercise your right to vote, the less partisan your district becomes. So don't think, if you live in, I know some people live in California, for example, many Republicans there won't even vote because they know that it's a Democratic state, right? And they think that their vote's going to be nullified, but that's not the case. If the winning candidate sees that even though there were 900,000 Democratic votes, but if there were still 700,000 Republican votes, then that candidate is more prone to hear the cries of both parties, which means that they're willing to cross the party lines to accommodate, to hear, to listen, to see who's pointing and who wants to be counted. Right? You have to know this is true. So this is really what creates inclusivity, the inclusivity of ideas and opinions that are normally dismissed. So Sukkot is the one holiday where you're asked to go outside of your home, which is obviously symbolic of leaving your preferences, your proclivities, and joining the world and embracing new ideas and new opinions. And for every ritual, it's always indicative of some larger idea. Sukkot is an invitation to be inclusive of the world. I heard a friend the other day say that they wouldn't invite a member of the opposing political party to their home, an old friend who just happens to vote contrary to their opinion and to their preference. They would not have them over. They were a friend, but they just didn't agree politically. They wouldn't have them over to their home under the sukkah for a meal. And that for some reason rubs me the wrong way, and I hope that it does you as well. How can we expect Congress to reach across the aisles and work together if we won't even have guests from the opposing party or from a different party sit at our dinner table? This is the whole idea of Sukkot, friends. Ushpizin, guests, right? That's the idea. We invite people who are guests that are not particularly members of our family. They're not particularly members of our tribe. They're not members of our political sphere, but instead they're guests that with God's help enlighten us in new ways. As we learn in Genesis, the beginning, right at the beginning of our talk here, leadership, even Congress, is a reflection of its citizenship, who are at this time, as you know, starkly divided. We can't even speak to one another if we don't agree. So it's time to perform acts that certainly encourage unity and bipartisanship. One, as we explained, is to vote. But also, invite a friend, invite a friend from the opposing political party to come over for tea in the backyard. You don't have to have them into your house. I know that's a risk, but have them 10 feet away outside. Understand that this kol ram, this divine noise that was right in the middle for the Levim, right? They're right in the middle of those two mountains in the center. When you leave and you cross the aisle, this becomes the noise of functional political discourse. It was the way for the children of Israel. It's been the way historically for America. I'd like to think that that's what we want. I hope to think that that's the way that we're moving forward. So please vote. And please talk to everyone, even those people you don't agree with. It's important. And if you don't know how to do that, call me. I'll help you with certain techniques that have been helpful to me.